Hello and welcome. I will be off saving the universe, but while I am doing that, make sure you listen to, what was that, Chesterfield? Type 40. Yes.
Time for Type 40, a Doctor Who podcast from the Spacebook for the Fandom Podcast Network. Happily hovering over as much of the Whoniverse as possible, the past, the present, and the future, here on your free-speaking, big-thinking show, 15 incarnations of the Time Lord. Well, 15 and some change. 61 years and counting. Whenever, wherever, and however you started your journey with the Doctor, you know you'll get something out of each and every trip. All the way. The mists of time, all the way back in time there. And although something doesn't look quite right aboard the old girl this time, not quite sure what, it could be my imagination. If it's not, and if I can't figure it out, I'm pretty sure that Simon Horton will be able to get to the bottom of it.
Mm-hmm. I've come dressed as the monk.
You're wearing a cowl.
I am. I'm in my monk's cowl. There you go. I look about as convincing as William Hartnell does in episode 3 of this story when he gets to put on his monk's cowl. He's equally unconvincing. So there we go.
You've come direct from cloisters, obviously.
It's got to be done, hasn't it?
Was cloisters a skiing resort? Is that
Cloisters? I think you're thinking of close, but there's no I.
Oh, it's so confusing. So confusing, Simon. I mean, the notion. Here we are looking at the monk's TARDIS here.
Yeah.
The notion that just a lick of paint and a slightly different camera angle, that is all that's required to change the mood, to convince you that you're somewhere else.
And it does actually work. It does work, and they lift the console up, don't they? They put the console on on stilts kind of thing, so the console's a little bit higher as well, and it does work. It does look convincingly enough like another TARDIS. I think they get away with it somehow.
Whereas now they do all kinds of digital jiggery pokery, wouldn't they? They'd spin us all upside down and inside out. Change the bulb, certainly, wouldn't they?
They'd certainly change the colour, that's for sure.
Newfangled modern Doctor Who. I've had enough of it all, Simon. I've had enough of it all. I mean, we get these big flashy graphics, don't we, up on screen? Huge letters telling us what's going to happen and generally when. Enough of the here and the now. I think we're going to go right back, tumble right the way back through Doctor Who's long, distinguished past, and to make sure that we don't get too misty-eyed with too much nostalgia, we have members of the younger generation, the younger crop of Doctor Who fans, Simon, to keep us a little more sighted. On the, I was going to say a little bit more sighted on the more holistic view of the Whoniverse, but you're probably right. Thank heaven for Sarah Graham and Charlotte Shields.
Hello, everybody.
Hello.
The glamour quota just went up.
Yes.
The view count just shot right up.
I do find it funny that we have all got black on in some description.
We have, yeah. None of it was planned.
Isn't that spooky? That what we see in this story is it? Well, it's very
very strange.
But for those, I'm going to get very arty and filmic for a second, because for anybody that's studied film, what you notice at this particular shot, this TARDIS, is what they call chiaroscuro, which is.
That's easy for you to say. Didn't they win the Eurovision Song Contest in '78?
With Babeng or something like that.
Yeah.
No. Chiaroscuro is a filmic term that talks about the sharp contrast between light and dark in a monochromatic image. So the chiaroscuro in this shot is the difference between the blackness in the background and the white of the doors and the white of the console. It's high contrast, basically. It's a filmic term that means high contrast. And this image in particular would be classed as a good example of good chiaroscuro.
Because like with the door, because like you said, it's sort of that frame of white.
Correct.
The blackness of it makes your eyes sort of zoom in.
There you go. That's what it's all about. It's focusing your attention in certain aspects of the screen. It's clever
Oh,
stuff.
we're very highbrow. This is yes.
Sarah. we're like a film school in one show, aren't we?
Eat your hearts out, Radio Free Scarro. Yeah, I mean, I do wonder, do things like that, are they hangovers from the days of black and white
Well, basically,
TV?
Yeah, they 100% are, because it's one of those techniques that, and when this is going to sound silly, but when you watch certainly things like German impressionistic cinema, things like The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari or Nosferatu, that's where they use a lot of this chiaroscuro to highlight, exactly as Charlotte is saying, to highlight the aspects that they need you to look at. Because nowadays it would be done in, for example, colour, or as you said a moment ago, Dan, in sort of snazzy computer graphics. And they didn't have any of those techniques in those days. So they've got to focus your attention somehow, because otherwise it was a very sort of flat, muddy image. So you had to get high contrast to pull out the aspects that you needed the viewer to be looking at. So that's exactly what it is. It's a hangover.
Would the colour equivalent have been, or would the colour evolution from something like that have been what they used to do on the old Batman show with Adam West, with all the Dutch angles and things like that?
And the kapows everywhere.
But I was thinking more the angles of the sets, how they would, because obviously the colours were so vivid on that, and they would project one colour on top of another, and it would all sort of bounce around the set.
Yeah,
and it was all, and it seemed beautifully balanced.
Well, it's exactly the same kind of thing. It's a sort of filmic technique, of a way of talking to the audience and saying, this is what we want you to look at here. This is how we want you to look at it. And again, if you look at German expressionistic cinema, again, a lot of that will be on what they call Dutch angles, which are at an angle, to give you this sort of feeling of sort of disorientation. And that's what you get if you think about Batman. It's always, where is it? It's the villain's lairs that are always at the angle.
It is, yeah.
Because they're trying to give across this impression of disorientation.
But also, like, if you think about the animated stuff, Batman, like the animated series, the most iconic shot is him in all dark, and then you get the flash of lightning, and it highlights his costume, and you get that sort of image of Batman as this sort of avenging figure. And I think that's why that shot is sort of the famous one from that series.
There are clearly sort of techniques and standards that are tools of the trade, that if they haven't evolved, that are sort of things that people can fall back on, I suppose, in filmmaking generally, whether it's on the big screen or the small screen.
Well, at the end of the day, it's grammar. In the same way that you use grammar to write a book, you use the grammar, the visual grammar, to tell a story. And that's basically what framing is. You know, we framed ourselves to tell the story. That at this moment in time, whether you like it or not, we are the four subjects, and so we're center frame, and so we're the point of that. So it's all to do with framing and just the grammar of the visual grammar of filmmaking. That once you start to unpack it, you're able to work out what they're doing, and there's a reason behind it. It does make sense. It's not just sort of thrown together.
And our screens have sort of nudged out from 4:3 to 16:9 and anamorphic. Then things would have gradually sort of shifted. The furniture will have shifted with it.
It changes the grammar around, and so you can suddenly use a larger part of the screen than you used to before, because your screen has literally gone out to the sides. It's it's not just thrown together. It is clever stuff, the way that the visual storytelling works.
To frame the action and frame those famous faces. Nowadays, of course, our stars, they pose and they pout and they flex. You know, I yearn for the days where there was a little bit more decorum. They were still sitting around, but they knew how to behave themselves, didn't they? The stars of Doctor Who way back in the day there. William Hartnell, of course, being a prime example of a statesman of British entertainment. By the time he was the first incarnation of Doctor Who, he'd been in big movies that were award-winning roles for him, and he'd been a star on television as well, hadn't he? Mainly in sitcoms, but not exclusively. So taking the role of the original Doctor Who was kind of the role. It was a role that topped off a career of eclectic parts: stage, television, and film.
And I think the thing is with William Hartnell, up until that point, Dan, you're quite right. He'd been very much a character actor, and so he'd done a very large, wide variety of different genres, different styles, different characters. So he was very much a character actor. Whereas Doctor Who, which, if you like, started as a character part, over the 3 years that he was there, obviously evolved into a truly iconic character for him as the pinnacle of his career. And I think it was the pinnacle of his career. He did arguably sort of higher profile films than Doctor Who, but this was the role by which he was remembered. And so he stopped being a character actor when he took on Doctor Who and created this role out of, well, very little really, and is thus forever remembered as playing the Doctor. So he morphed from a character actor to a leading man. Simple as that.
See, I wondered about this because I looked at the Army game a little while ago and noticed how many series they made of that, Sarah. Lots of episodes, probably as many episodes of that as there was of Doctor Who. It was a big show. It was on for years. And although I think it made him a household face, I got the impression it didn't necessarily make him a household name, probably because it wasn't that kind of part. It was an ensemble cast, whereas in Doctor Who, particularly by the time of the second season, which we're going to be talking about a big chunk of on this edition of the show, by the second season, it was very much all about the Doctor, wasn't it?
Well, yeah, it was the leading man, and obviously we just had Dalek Mania at this point, so we're talking by season 2, peak Doctor Who, very much at the forefront, and he was a beloved face. Yeah, he was absolutely the bona fide lead of this show.
When I was a kid, Charlotte, I used to see pictures of William Hartnell, always in black and white, very, very rarely in colour, in Doctor Who Weekly and then Doctor Who Monthly. And they tended to be the same photos over and over again. They were taken from stories. You never see anything candid. It was as if the man was sort of set in stone. Whereas now, we see a lot more of the man who was inside of the role. And that hasn't really dented his legacy. In fact, it's probably enhanced it, I think.
Yeah, because I think we like to see the human side to our actors sometimes, especially when that human side actually informs the performance. And the thing that I remember when I first started watching the Hartnell stuff, because I watched out of order. I watched modern stuff and then I went back and watched the classic. I remember from early on, you've got that sense of almost an impishness about his Doctor, like a bit of a cheekiness, which I think to begin with, you only saw little bits of. And I think what I enjoy, especially when we get to this point in his era, you can see he's developed the character more and you see more of that slightly less stern, but it's still there in parts, but he's actually having a bit of fun. You can tell in scenes, and he's got that sort of sense of humour. So when you see those more candid stuff, you can tell actually he probably was somebody who, if you were on the right side of him, I do get the impression you could be on the wrong side of Hartnell. But if you were in his good books, actually he probably was an absolute barrel of laughs, and he was probably a very fun person just to be around because he's just got that shine, and that's what he brought to the part. But I think that was very much him when he realised I can sort of make this character what I want a little bit. It didn't have to be as much of what's on the script.
When I go back and watch chunks of the series as well, Charlotte, I think sometimes, depending on what sort of frame of mind I'm in, sometimes I watch them just to get a fix of something. Other times I watch them with like a real curiosity, or it just hits me at the right time where I think, I fancy doing a bit of reading up on this, or I'd like to know a little bit more about it in context. Sometimes about TV at the time, sometimes about the actors, where they were at in their career at the time that they sort of skipped in and out of the show. In this time, though, when I was looking at this particular story we're going to talk about, it struck me how British television was so much smaller. Talking about the orientation of the screen, Sarah, being, TVs themselves were far, far smaller, and they were very, very square. BBC TV was a lot smaller. It was before even BBC Two existed. There was just BBC TV, and that was that. It was the year before there was a second channel. The only competition they got for people's attention was ITV. So it isn't any wonder really that the people who made it big made it really big.
What they achieved in this really tight. Well, we know the budget has always been really low, but there were just these tiny little sets, but everything's just made like maximized to its potential to give you that illusion, and all the clever tricks they did. I just love how like out there 60s TV was.
There was an idea that some of the international appeal of classic Doctor Who in particular was the notion that let's see what we can achieve with very little, certainly in the way of money. And I was never convinced that was actually truly part of the appeal. But it's an idea that was sold to us largely by the BBC themselves. This is why people in America like it. I've never seen any evidence of that. But I do believe that necessity was the mother of invention when it came to Doctor Who. And so that sort of pushing themselves onward and onward and onward, simply because the reality, Simon, of having to crank out how many episodes a year were they making at this point?
Well, well over 45. They only had about a 6-week break at most. I do think that part of it is Sarah's right. They were taking risks with a lot of this stuff, and this isn't just Doctor Who. This is all television of that era. Was taking a lot of risks, and I think part of that was because, in a way, there was so little competition. There was another channel which was competition to the BBC, and there was a competition to ITV as well in the form of the BBC. So they were competing against each other, but it was a very different competition to now. Whereas now everybody everything is just desperate to get any viewer, and it will do anything to get a viewer. Whereas in those days, they were far more willing to push the envelope, try experimentations, try stuff, because they were focused, I think, on just making the best quality that they could without worrying about what all the other channels are doing, all the other sides were doing, what everybody else was doing, that they've got to stand out in the crowd, they've got to have gimmicks. There were no gimmicks, let's be honest. Gimmicks did not exist at this point in British television in the way that gimmicks exist now. The broadcasters, television program makers will do anything, filmmakers will do anything just to hook a gimmick on it, to create it. I mean, let's be honest, you would never nowadays cast William Hartnell as your leading role. You just wouldn't do it. It wouldn't happen. He's simply not photogenic enough, poor bloke. He wouldn't be viewed as photogenic enough. And so I think that there was experimentation going on there in those days, and there was risk taking, and there was innovation and originality without thinking about, what's everybody else doing? Do we need to? No, they were just trying to make the best television.
What are the corporate implications?
None of that was worried
what we're
about
putting
that.
Out.
Didn't think about it. They just thought about what's the best for this program at this moment in time. And sometimes they got it right, sometimes they got it wrong. And clearly with Doctor Who, overall, they got it right, because that's why we're still here 60 years later.
It's endured. Can you believe it's taken us this long to get around as well to reviewing a William Hartnell era story?
Shocking, Dan. It's shocking.
What would he have to say about it if
he would be grumpy?
I think it's probably best that we don't know.
He'd probably give us a good telling off, I think.
He would. A good smacked bottom.
We'll be rematerializing at a very precise junction in Who history this time. That's right after I remind you, if you'd like to do some real time traveling of your own, each and every edition of this show, past, present and future, is only a tap or two away on the device of your choice if you know exactly where to look. There's well over 150 other podcasts. It's a proper back and forth catalogue of reviews, previews, interviews, geek outs and deep dives with all our regular panellists and lots of awesome guests. something for every fan, in fact, over at type40.podbean.com. More about that a little later on. And we'll be making time to plug our sister and brother, cousin, and other podcasts across the fabulous Fandom Podcast Network too. Yeah, the original time travelers escaped the city of the mechanoids and another tussle with the deadly Daleks, even if they did get split up once and for all one last time. What became of that nice young man, though? History in the making or the breaking next. Less than 2 years, Doctor Who had become a series that brought the nation together. Pressure was on to stay on top, to maintain not just the interest of the viewing public, but that momentum too. Was the script editor, the departing script editor, right in his assertion that Doctor Who could endure even when long-standing cast members decide to take their leave? The Time Meddler had to close the second season in such a way that the audience wouldn't be tempted to remain behind too. Whether you first saw it on Blu-ray, DVD, VHS, or on telly in the 90s, even in the 60s, here's a quick trailer to jog your memory banks about the Time Meddler. You're going to like this.
He must be stopped.
It's the eve of the Battle of Hastings, but someone has alternative plans.
You know as well as I do the golden rule about space and time traveling. Never, never interfere with the course of history. Is that some kind of neutron bomb?
They're pretty unpleasant-looking things, whatever they are.
So that's it! You're a time meddler. No wonder you wanted to get rid of me.
Will the Doctor win?
Doctor Who, the Time Meddler by Dennis Spooner, broadcast between the 3rd of July 1965 and the 24th of July 1965. And here's a little synopsis of the storyline. The Doctor and Vicki discover that Stephen has survived the collapse of the mechanoid city and found refuge in the TARDIS. Their next landing is a beach in Northumbria in the year 1066. Or is it? A wristwatch, gramophone player, and futuristic cannon are among the anachronistic items that have mysteriously found their way back to the 11th century. The answer lies with a monk who's recently moved into a monastery near a Saxon settlement. The Doctor realises the monk is a time traveller, indeed one of his own people, and that he's planning to alter the course of Earth history by destroying the approaching Viking fleet. He must be stopped. He must be stopped, Charlotte.
Because he's causing too many problems.
Too much aggravation. So obviously this is back in the day when each individual serial of Doctor Who had an individual episode title as well that sort of made it all up, isn't it? Which is always a little strange when you go back and watch these episodes, because I often think, were the children who watched it at the time, the Ian McLaughlins, the Ian Levines, basically anybody called Ian, any of those characters who were digesting this on the weekly, to them, it was simply episode by episode by episode, wasn't it? They didn't think of it in 4 or 8 or 6 week blocks. And that's just part of the difference, I think, that we now take a little for granted, Simon. Now we've had these episodes, these storylines repackaged in various forms as books, as videotapes, as DVDs and whatnot, to try and look back at this time in television with a simpler eye for the experience of the viewer back then, whatever their age.
Well, yeah, because generally, overall, the viewers wouldn't even know whether this was a 2-part story, a 4-part story, a 6-part story. They wouldn't know that this was the last episode of the Time Meddler, for example, or the Chase, or any of them. It was just to continue. It was an adventure in time and space. That's how it was built in the Radio Times. And so it was just, as you say, Dan, each episode had its own title. So it was just an ongoing thing with a different episode title each week. And you didn't realise at that point what the discrete blocks were going to be and when that story was going to end and the new one was going to begin. So you just followed it on. You just continued and waited to see whether would be a new story next week. Didn't know.
I kind of miss all that.
I do too.
Because it ups the stake. Now I think we're in danger. We know too much.
Yes.
I think back to the old RKO serials that they were still repeating. These were serials that were made for the cinema, Charlotte, back in the 1930s, and they were still repeating them on British television in the 1980s. And I thought, well, this is kind of similar because each instalment of those had individual titles, but they had episode numbers as well. They were like chapter 1, chapter 2. There was nothing like that. The show just seemed to roll on indefinitely.
Well, I think it worked so well because they felt so self-contained, and I think that's what always sort of hits me when I watch classic Who, that I'm used to, because modern Who, like, the story just sort of starts and finish and there's no sort of individual parts to it. Or even if it's in a two-parter, it's pretty much one whole story, just split it down in the middle. Whereas here, you could, if you wanted, you could pick just random episodes from certain stories and just see them as almost their own little self-contained adventure. And it's actually makes it quite fun at times, just to sort of picture all these events being their self-contained sort of things. Then I think modern Who's got the trap now and again of sort of making everything over grand and over long and over like, oh, everything's so important and massive and big. And it's like, no, actually, it's quite nice just to have half an hour of them just sort of exploring the environment and finding out what they can find, and then it's the next story that actually has the baddie. Like, it's nice to have that sort of, like I said, self-containedness.
Well, also, the other thing to remember, of course, with the Time Meddler, which we're going to talk about, is this was the final story. This was the finale, in inverted commas, of season 2. So what's strange, of course, now, and I've always struggled with this in modern Who, why it is that the season finale now is very much a finale with a capital F, and you've really got to just make it bigger and better than the last finale from a year ago or whatever. Whereas in
everything,
those
including
days,
the kitchen sink, goes into it.
Yeah, absolutely. Whereas in those days, this was the season finale, and you are watching a regular episode, a regular serial of Doctor Who. There is nothing extraordinary about it at all. The only tip of the hat that they make to it being a season finale is the very final shots when you get the lovely starscape with the three faces just drifted in. That's it. That's the signal that, okay, it's got a slightly sort of poetic, romantic conclusion to it that says our heroes are drifting off into the distance for a little while. But that's it. There is nothing big and exciting about it, and it still bothers me to this day why modern Doctor Who, and it isn't just modern Doctor Who, this is a malaise that goes across all television series these days. For some reason, the season finale has to be bigger and better and bolder and more exciting and more wow whiz, wow, you won't believe this. And I don't know why they try to constantly do this. Just do a good story. That's all we need. We don't need masses of spectacle.
Yeah, because in the case of this particular serial, these 4 episodes, they were deliberately produced at a lower cost because they spent so much on the 6-part Dalek story.
That's right.
That had come directly before. It's a totally different culture.
Yeah. Originally, this was that they were going to use they were going to use some of the budget on location filming for this particular story, and they voted again. They decided against it, and all the money, as you say, Dan, basically went to the chase to make the chase the bigger, more spectacular. Well, hey, we've got a space helmet for a cow. Brilliant. Really, it's got to be done.
It's got to be done. Yeah, I just had this hanging about,
As you do.
I think for what you were talking about the budget, I feel like that actually really helped with the character stuff in this story.
Mm-hmm.
Because you've got to introduce Stephen. I know he was in the previous story, but this is his first sort of as a companion sort of story. So you've got to get his dynamic on screen. You've got to get him and Vicki's sort of how they're going to play off each other, because we've just had pretty much a really fan favourite, beloved couple in Ian and Barbara leaving. And you've got to sort of have the Doctor sort of get used to him. So you've got a lot of character stuff, which I feel like if they rushed, it would really make the story lesser. But because they weren't concentrating on, like you said, having loads of money and big sets.
Yeah.
They could really like drill down on these character moments, and that's what I quite enjoy about this story.
But isn't it interesting though as well, Charlotte, don't you think? Because I think you're correct in everything you're saying, but it's also done so deftly. It's not done like a sledgehammer being hit over the head with you will get to know the new companions. It's just deftly done. It's dropped in. The characterization becomes part of the action. It's incidental rather than on the nose. Whereas in a lot of modern drama these days, it's much more, well, for want of a better word, it feels quite laboured to me sometimes. You feel that they're working too hard to establish characters, whereas, as I say, Stephen is dropped into the action and you are very much aware you're looking at a new companion. And they do, as you say, they go out of their way to introduce him and give him a character and get him to settle in. And it works very, very well without feeling laboured and without feeling that you're being sort of browbeaten into getting to know this character. Does that make sense? Do you get that?
No, I think if you're looking at the mechanics of it, I think this actually serves the character of Stephen beautifully.
Yes, it does.
Peter Purvis and Stephen Taylor himself come out of it really, really well.
As does Maureen O'Brien, actually, and she's carrying a lot of it because of the fact that she's not been around for that long at this point. And the Doctor is away doing other stuff through a lot of this story. So a lot of it comes down to Maureen O'Brien as the familiar character to us, to sort of just ease us across and get us used to Stephen. And I think the pair of them together are some of the best bits of this story. It's just their dynamic is great.
Well, Vicki almost assumes a Doctor-like role.
Yeah, in many ways.
With Stephen as the companion, and Maureen O'Brien as Vicki. I mean, she's probably my favourite of the Hartnell era companions, and so she's able to bring that kind of playfulness to it, and you can see that she enjoys not teasing Stephen as such, but she's there with him, kind of guiding him through it, Charlotte. And I think it's a subtly joyous performance as the characters bond. And I feel the actors are bonding too as we're watching them on screen. I think it's delightful.
I think it was such a clever writing idea to basically have Stephen be the skeptic.
Yes.
Like the first 2 episodes, he's having to be convinced that the TARDIS works, that it's a time machine, that they've gone back to hundreds of years in the past. So because he's a skeptic, it's sort of this really fun dynamic of him having questioning moments and having to sort of have a bit of a rude awakening at the point he does, to go, no, this is real and this could be dangerous. And I agree,
Charlotte, with Ian and Barbara, they were both from the same exact moment in history, and kind of similar people with similar values. Vicki and Stephen didn't know one another beforehand, but they are both from the future. And so that's interesting to put 2 people from the far future into this situation where they're in the distant past.
That's what's interesting, that he's not sort of questioning the idea of ships and being able to travel. That's not the thing that's questioning here. It's the actual, surely you can't have a time machine. Like, that's the thing he's trying to get his head around. And I think Vicki takes on here, she reminds me of like a fun sort of bigger sister to him. Because she does explain about the TARDIS, and like those scenes when they are separate, she is sort of being that wise voice to him. Because the thing is with Stephen also, he's a very sort of brash character. He's sort of, he thinks before he does things. He sort of goes for it. So she has to be the sort of calming, wise influence on him. But like you said, because of how she's played by Maureen, there's a bit of playfulness, like a sister. That teasing that we've spoke about. To me, that's like what a family member would do to somebody who you quite love and like in that way familiarly, but you will sort of, when you can, go, that's a bit stupid, or have a bit of a fun like jab.
Yeah, I mean,
and that's what she does.
It's almost like a precursor to like the Jamie and Zoe relationship. Very much that, like you said, that sibling.
And I think because they put them together in these situations too, where they're in very close proximity to one another because of the necessities of making the show in small areas. You know, the studios were very, very small, weren't they? But the story itself is not exactly huge. It's not a sprawling story particularly. The stakes are very, very clear. It's not a great big cast that make up this, as well as Peter Purves and Maureen O'Brien. There's Edith, played by Alethea Charlton. Now, she'd been in the series before. She was in An Earthly Child, playing a cave woman character, quite a similar looking character, really, with sort of mad hair,
yes,
dirt all over her face.
Very similar.
Yeah, have a word with your agent, maybe. So she was back. Eldred, played by Peter Russell. Woolnoth was played by Michael Miller. Michael Guest was the Saxon hunter. Norman Hartley was Ulf. And Geoffrey Cheshire was the Viking leader, with David Anderson as Sven and Ronald Rich as Gunnar the Giant, topped off with Peter Butterworth as the meddling monk himself. So it's not exactly, it isn't a big cast, and it's seldom that there's any more than 2 or 3 of them on screen at any given time. I like stories like this, though, where everything is really, really clear, and it all moves along at a kind of, I wouldn't say a sedate pace, but I think it's a very steady story that enables us to familiarise ourselves with these new dynamics, and also to get a bit of a flavour for the period that they're trying to recreate in this way.
It's a very small story with very big ideas. That in effect, it's painting an epic canvas, but on a canvas this big, which I think is quite cleverly done. And it is one of those stories where I think anybody would understand it. It's not difficult to follow. There's no convolutions. You know, it can't be accused of being overly confusing by any means. It's very clear, very straightforward. It obviously relies on you watching the whole thing. Apparently, the Radio Times were having letters and points of view were having letters written in after the first episode saying, "This is ridiculous. They didn't have gramophones and wristwatches in 1066. What a stupid program this is." Of course, they clearly missed the point entirely. But as long as you stick with it, it very, very clearly and simply unpacks until the end. Okay, right now I get it. I understand what the whole story is about. And there can't be any confusion on anybody's part. You can't be sitting there saying, sorry, which was that character? What were they? What? There's no confusion. It's very clear and concise. But with big ideas, like very big ideas.
Is this the first story where we get, the Doctor's rule of not interfering with time?
Well, not really. The first story is the Aztecs that you get that in. It's the Aztecs that is the Doctor not interfering with time. But oddly, this is actually the first story that does interfere with time, or theoretically actively, and we see the consequences of what might happen if time was interfered with. So this is the first time you sort of see it in action, as it were. But it's also the first what will become known as sort of pseudo historicals. This is the first time that we get a historical with science fiction elements. Every historical up until this point had been pure historical, and so this was a new way of doing historicals, was with science fiction elements within it. So that's a first.
There'd been the instance in The Chase, hadn't there, when it was more an aside, really, a comic aside. The idea that the Daleks had been responsible for the Marie Celeste.
But that was very much an explanation as to why the Mary Celeste was deserted, rather than perverting the course of history. It was in the same way that the Doctor starting the Great Fire of London in the Visitation is not changing history. It's just basically saying this is why the Great Fire of London came about. Whereas here we're talking about potentially changing the entire course of human history. And there's that great scene in this, and I love the scene again between Stephen and Vicki, where they talk about, they're trying to get their heads around this paradox of, okay, if the monk actually gets away with what he wants to do, our memories will change forever. And Stephen says, but what about history books? And Vicki says, well, the history books haven't been written yet, so they will be written with the new timeline. It's a brilliant scene where they tackle this really thorny issue of what happens, the paradox of what happens when you change history. How does it change? And I love the way they challenge it, and they really challenge it, head on. And they come up with some really interesting arguments about, how does time paradoxes work? How does this work? It's really clever stuff.
I also find it quite brave that in their second series, we're already getting not technically, they are another person from the Doctor's home planet.
Yeah.
And I find it that this early on, they thought, yes, we're going to introduce, obviously at this point, we didn't know the whole history of Gallifrey and Time Lords, but the fact that it makes it very clear he's one of the Doctor's people.
Yeah.
And the fact that let's make this person actually a villain. Let's actually make them not this sort of good character. Or I suppose I say that though, but the monk has got an argument in this story. His argument,
and it's a fair argument.
It's an argument of, well, yes, maybe in some cases I've done it for my own benefit when I've meddled, but in this case, if I stop history, I stop wars, I stop death, I stop a lot of terrible things from happening. So, sort of that once again, Simon, through a very sort of simple in some ways character, but actually what this character represents is something really quite important.
Yes.
And like I said, the fact that he's a Time Lord. So we're starting to see a bit of the Doctor's history, but in a very, very small way.
Yes.
They didn't go over the top. It was very small. But once again, this idea of, which is always, I find interesting when historical, whatever, if it's Doctor Who or something else that deals with time, when they basically argue, but what if we changed it for the better? What if we changed it with the foresight of what we know actually now? Is that a good way? Or is it just as irresponsible as others would make you think? That's what I find interesting.
Yeah, and I would hesitate in saying that this was more sophisticated, but I think that at the point that I'm at now, I find this a lot more interesting. The same as in many respects, I find the Rani's motivations a lot more interesting than the Master's too. That amoral aspect to it. With this, I feel the same way. I mean, you could say that the monk is a kind of, in the same way that the Doctor is not, or this incarnation of the Doctor is not a typically heroic figure.
Yes.
The monk isn't a typically particularly villainous figure.
No.
Either. What he wants isn't control of the universe. You say his motivations are pretty clear. Largely, if history's going to change in a pretty kind of passive way for most people, then is he really doing any harm? He seems to be earning a few quid out of it, and there's something a little bit Dick Dastardly about the fact that he keeps a little diary of all the shitty things that he's done, and he's got that scroll with the checklist of stuff he wants to do. There is that side to it. There's something cartoonish about all that, but it does have that kind of playful, the Beano and the dandy kind of way. But as an opposing force to this Doctor, it works really, really well, because the Doctor, as I say, he's not the striding, a broad-shouldered third Doctor, for example. And so he doesn't really require a villain with a widow's peak and a diabolical plan necessarily.
No, I would say they're both shades of similar grey, really, rather than being black and white. And the other thing that strikes me, and you've just touched on it there really, Charlotte, is when the monk is revealed as being from the same planet as the Doctor. This is obviously the Time Lords are not mentioned at this point, so it's just merely identified as he's from the same planet as you. And the way they do it, again, it's just so subtle and deftly done. Whereas, again, if you think of nowadays, it will be done, with a massive swooping camera move, and the music will be blah, blah. Oh my God, he's the same as the.
We hear some woman singing over your left shoulder.
And we would be expected to react in. Whereas this is just. Well, he's the same planet as me, and it's just done so beautifully and subtly, and it's with that confidence that the viewer will be sitting there going, "Wow, I didn't see that coming," and so it doesn't need to hit you over the head. It just drops it in there beautifully and leaves it for you to work out.
And this wasn't celebrity casting either. There's a misconception out there. And I'll call it a misconception because I was labouring under the same misconception
We all
myself.
did, Dan.
There was a misconception that Peter Butterworth was cast because he was famous from the Carry On movies. He hadn't appeared in the Carry On film.
That's correct.
Until after the Time Meddler.
Yeah.
So he was a jobbing character actor. I think people may have recognised his face because he'd done a lot of telly, or they may have recognised his voice because he'd done a lot of radio. But this man wasn't a star. He wasn't even Kenneth Williams.
No.
And yet he creates this character really, really beautifully in this, and leaves it's all left hanging in the air from the moment he first appears on the cliff top as a cowled figure. There's something really kind of mysterious and almost romantic about it as well. There's no, as you say, there's no villainous sting to the music. We just know that someone is watching. Well, the episode is called The Watcher. And so the expectations of children watching at the time may not have been the sort of, that's the villain. What's he going to do? What diabolical thing has he got up his cassocks? It's a watcher. It's a monk.
And he doesn't come across as diabolical.
No.
You're quite right. He comes across as quite lovable and mischievous. Very lovable.
Yeah.
It's impossible not to love him. And you don't love him as the villain you love to hate in a sort of a JR kind of way. No, he's just a thoroughly likable person. He's the sort of person you want to have around for a cup of tea and a slice of cake.
He tries to reach the Doctor at one point, and his kind of explanation for his behaviour, he gives it, and then he says, "It's better my way, Doctor. It's more fun."
And in a way, it is a compelling argument because let's be honest, if it wasn't for the monk, we wouldn't have Stonehenge, for example.
Exactly.
You know, he's got a point. He has got a point. He's done some good stuff. He's done some good work. Yeah. You know, it is a very compelling argument. It's not a simple, a Dick Dastardly, to use your analogy, Dan. It's not a Dick Dastardly, a conniving, hooded claw kind of villain. Not at all.
It was all written by Dennis Spooner, who he was, at this point, he was the script editor, wasn't he? He was about to leave the job. So he'd sort of convinced them to let him write one final story before he was... This was something that would happen over and over again with Doctor Who, wasn't it, as well? That departing script editors would sort of sell them on this. So he was commissioned by Verity Lambert to write this story, to introduce Stephen, because this was one of Spooner's, I wouldn't say obsessions, but a major goal that he had on the show was to prove that the series could outlive its changes of its cast. Because I suppose a lot of adventure shows back then, if they, particularly ensemble casts, they would, maybe police shows like Z-Cars, people would come in and out of that. But those are shows that have got a more dramatic, more adult audience. This is a family show, so I suppose it was slightly different, wasn't it? So Spooner had come to Doctor Who after working on The Avengers. That was another Sidney Newman show. And afterwards, he'd go straight over to the Baron, uniting with Terry Nation, of all people, at ITC. So Doctor Who was something that he only kind of really passed through. But these were kind of key things that he put in place. And he's actually got quite a discernible voice, hasn't he? I can't imagine any other writer having created a character like the monk that we've just been speaking about, because it has those sort of lightly comic touches. It was directed by Douglas Camfield, wasn't it? Douglas Camfield is now he's seen as one of Doctor Who's most sort of venerated directors, isn't he? But at the time he was earlier in his career, just 34 years old. He'd been connected with Doctor Who since the start. He'd been the production assistant, I think, on the pilots and maybe the broadcast serial as well, and An Earthly Child, and then again on Marco Polo. For all that this story has all of the trappings of everything else from its time, there does seem to be something about it, a shift in focus, in ambition. And for every painted backdrop you've got, you notice that it's meant to be a forest, but you can tell it's a painting, particularly on Blu-ray now. For every one of those really ropey scenes, there's a scene where they're on the top of the cliff's edge, and the cloudy skies are literally rolling behind them. And we can tell it's it's a back projection. But for a split second, you're convinced that they're on the cliff. It works like a charm every single time. And that I can't remember seeing anything like that on Doctor Who before this point. And I suspect that was an innovation of Douglas Camfield's.
Yeah, I think it was. You know, we started sort of talking about sort of filmic technique at the beginning of this show, and I think you can see an upping of directorial style here. I think you're right, Dan, in what you said a few minutes ago about sort of the pace is very slow in this story, and I think that is a problem with it for me personally. The pacing is very slow, and I think a lot of that might be down to the scripting more so, or at least as much as the direction. But what Douglas Camfield does bring is he does bring a great visual flair. You're right, Dan. Those shots looking up at them on the cliff top are beautiful, with the sky scudding in the background. But also what Douglas Camfield does a lot of is he really gets good value out of the woodland set. There are so many shots looking through foliage, so much of where he brings the foliage into the foreground to give depth to it, whereas previously it would have been a lot flatter, where you'd have had the foliage in the background and they just stood in front of it. Whereas, as I say, Douglas Camfield really makes a lot of use of different layers, different depths between foreground, middle ground, background. He understands what he's doing with that sort of what we talked about a while ago, visual grammar of how to create that sense.
As borderline vaudeville as it is between the Doctor and the Monk,
and it is,
I get a lot less of that kind of somebody exit stage left, come on from stage right feel about this particular story, and that would have been down to Camfield, I suspect. I mean, I think you're right. I think that that the story has. I think it starts very confidently and with loads of atmosphere, and the bringing in, the drawing us in with this cowled figure that we know nothing about. And the Doctor's curiosity, that sort of silent curiosity that William Hartnell plays that so well. So he's able to communicate exactly kind of where he's going, and generally we trust that he knows what he's doing, and we just hope that he's going to be okay. You know, that's how I always feel about the first Doctor when he gets up to this sort of stuff. You know, he thinks, what's Vicki going to say? You know, what about when she comes and looks for you? It's sort of the innocent adventure of it all. I love all that. It does drift a little, I think, in part 2. And that's despite the best efforts of the supporting cast. So I think they're all really, really strong, particularly Alethea Charlton. I think the character of Edith is the most well-realised of all of them.
Yeah, she comes across very, very well. I think they're all well cast. I think it is a well cast part. I honestly think it would be, as a story, it's interesting that the season 2 opens with Planet of Giants, which is 4 parts cut down to 3 because they felt it was baggy and it was struggling. I honestly think season 2 ends with another perfect example of where they could and probably should have cut 4 parts down to 3. It does get baggy in the middle for me. There is too much backwards and forwards there, from the monastery to the cliff top. They're back from the cliff top back to the monastery, then they're back to the village, then they go from the village back to the there's too much just backwardsing and forwardsing. It just needed to be, I think it would have benefited enormously from just tightening up purely to 3 parts. That's all it needs, is 1 episode cutting out, I think.
Because by the time the story really starts to sort of kick into gear again, which is probably midway through episode 3, watching them in the way that we watch them now, Charlotte, you have to get yourself a bit more hyped up. Now, okay, I have to start paying attention again now because the Doctor's back in the mix. And the fact is that, we know the logistics of actors had to have holidays back then, or sometimes they were ill or whatever, and production had to carry on. But the simple fact is, if the Doctor Who is that kind of show where if that character is not there at the dead centre of it, the show suffers, doesn't it?
Yeah, I think the problem is, for all that good character stuff we said at the beginning, I feel like that middle bit just needs to have a little bit less of that, in the regards to, like you said, you sort of lose track of, there is a lot of, he's lost, we need to go and find the Doctor. He's not in there, let's go back to the village. He's got out again, we've just missed him.
Yeah.
That sort of stuff. And I think some of it is because they want what we said at the beginning of this sort of show of to get that interaction on screen. But you have to be a little bit more careful at times of, is that overriding the plot and is the plot getting lost? Yeah. And I think that that's what happens there. You sort of, like you said, you find yourself losing track and going, okay, so what's the danger right now? What's the issue? Why are they separated?
And how pressing can it possibly be if they're prepared to, for 10 or 15 minutes, precious airtime, go off and, as you said, Simon, wander around for a little bit more?
Yeah. Some of that is, I mean, I do like the idea that they go back to the TARDIS and the tide's coming, because I think that's a legitimate question that fans and viewers would have been worried about. And I love the fact that Vicki gets so upset and then the Doctor barely even registers it. Oh, don't bother me with that, it's fine. I love how that mini little scene was played out. But yeah, I agree that the to-ing and fro got a bit too much. I don't know how you could have missed each other. Yes, really.
But these are the things that we just go, oh yeah. It's like the moments where we're aware that even though Hartnell's not around that week, he's clearly recorded the voiceover, Simon, that they're playing in. And they go, oh, okay, I get it. It's all part of the fun for us, I suppose, now. And back then, they probably wouldn't have noticed. They would have just accepted it. Yeah, so there's no harm. There's no harm there, is there?
To be fair, it adds to part of the charm of watching it. It's all part of the fun where you pick that little bit out. But yeah, but I do agree generally. It does sag that second part. I remember when I first ever watched this one, I thought Edith had actually died, and I thought, that's very brave. Because it cuts, doesn't it, for a little while and comes back, and I thought, wow.
Yeah, it does appear that she's died, and it's a really brave decision, because basically what they're saying is, and this is really adult stuff, she's been raped. It is as simple as that. Mm-hmm. She has been raped by the Vikings. This is really, we're back to rape and pillaging. That's what this is, and that's why she's reacting the way she's reacting. It's a brave adult decision, because she is in shock. She clearly, it's not just that she's been a little bit scared by the Vikings. No, she's been violated by the Vikings. And that's why she's in literal catatonic shock. That's why she appears to have died. That was a really brave decision, I think, on the part of the program makers. Obviously, the kids wouldn't have got it. They're just thinking she's not very well. The adults, I would imagine, would understand quite what is going on in that scene. And as I say, that was a very adult decision to make for a children's program.
You say that, but if you remember, Simon, I mean, certainly I remember history classes when I was at primary school. They were a lot more blunt about historical events then.
Yes, they were.
About things, but like Henry VIII decapitating his wives and things like that.
It wasn't sanitized, is what you're saying. It wasn't.
No. And so the expression rape and pillage, when it comes to Vikings, it's something you would hear.
You forget.
Without knowing what it meant.
In there for a reason. Yeah.
But I like that, especially with the 60s one, with the historicals, that they aren't afraid to shy away from that, and they do try and give it as as realistic as possible. I mean, I remember feeling that way in the Crusade, but again, that was more, it wasn't really shown, it was just kind of alluded to with Barbara. I remember feeling really like, oh, I don't like this. Like, wow,
absolutely,
because they're showing the impact of something without being graphic in any way at all.
It's the one character from sort of the village setting which is given any real sort of scenes beyond just sort of stereotypical, oh, they're bad, we need to get them away. Like that, the blokes sort of in this story are written very one note.
Yes.
And I think, but I'm saying that because I think that's on purpose, because they decided if there's one character we want to give some human sort of qualities to, and we actually want you to connect to a little bit in the village setting, it's her. Because like you said, I don't think we would have been affected as much if we didn't care as much about her. And that's what the writers and the actress did in this story. They made you care for her.
Yes. Yeah, because you warm to her, you want to spend time with her. She's clearly nice to spend time with. That's why the Doctor goes back again. I like the fact that the Doctor goes back there because he got comfort and companionship in episode 1, and so he returns to her, and so they create this very warm character. So it is very shocking.
They're nice scenes as well, aren't they? When the doctor's sort of recounting, oh, next week this is going to happen, and then he's going to lose that battle, and then but next year everything's going to be fine. Oh, but then he's there sort of chatting away to himself, just slightly a few feet in front of her.
Was some of that ad-libbed by Hartnell, I read? So is that a miss?
Some of it is ad-libbed. Some of it is ad-libbed.
Oh,
I think it was all in the script, but some of it is. I think it was one of those things where, in all honesty, Hartnell probably couldn't remember the full words within the script, and so that's why a lot of it almost comes across as ad-libbed, because it's working with original lines, but he brings them out. He expresses them in his own way because he can't remember the full words, but he still gets the message across, and so it comes across very, very naturalistically. It's nicely done. I love, as you say, Dan, those thoughts where he's standing there in the foreground, sort of going through all this very mischievously in his mind, while she's standing in the background, sort of trying to, what is he talking about? It's nicely done. It's nicely written, and again, it's nicely played and nicely directed.
I feel complaining about the middle of the story and the absence of the Doctor. I think, well, I always really enjoy this. Isn't that really churlish of me? If I like it this much, does it really matter? It's never a chore to watch any of that stuff. No. So perhaps watching it with a critical eye in such a way, maybe I'm missing the point, because it is to inform and entertain, and more than a great many of the serials from the time, I think this ticks both of those boxes pretty well.
I think if there is a fault with this story, and I do have a bit of a problem with the story from the point of view of it's, as I say, it's a very small story with very big ideas. In a way, I think I want to see a little bit more of the big ideas in actual action and reality. And I just feel that the script just hasn't got, as I say, quite enough going on for 4 episodes. It just seems ironic to me that they pared down Planet of Giants for the same reason, but they didn't pare this down. And I think they should have looked at it and said, you know what? Yeah, Hartnell's missing in that episode too because he's on a holiday. So that just feels a bit. So if we just condensed it down a little bit, there just doesn't seem quite enough going on to me.
I think what's missing is that we only really get 2 encounters between the Doctor and the monk. It's missing that third.
Good point.
Third encounter that I don't know. It just seems to be missing a component part, a natural end point, or something in the middle. You know, they meet once for the first time, and then they meet pretty much at the end. And I think they need to reconnect. I think a lot of the action and the narrative, the story, the plot that is rolled out in part 4 ideally should have been in part 3.
Yes, I agree.
And if Hartnell would have been there, then I think he probably would. The 2 characters would have met more time, and it would have been a lot more of a charged confrontation between the 2, rather than, okay, this is where my position, this is your position. It's more fun my way. Well, I think you're irresponsible, and you're a bounder, and you're a meddler. You know, and all these sort of things. The actual confrontation at the end, you know, which he leaves him a letter, which is, it's fun, and it's very. I like the visuals of it. It's not very satisfying dramatically.
No, it would have been nice for him to have done it face to face.
Literally deliver justice.
but having said that, the way Peter Butterworth reads that letter is just golden. It's my favourite scene in the whole. And you see the whole characterisation as he goes on to in the Carry On films. It's all there. Yeah. In that scene, the way he did it, it's all the little hums and the smiles and the little frowns, and it's beautiful the way he delivers that.
It's the problem with this, because it's all so delightful that having any problems with it, all of these things, all of these elements in and of themselves are all delightful. And so to pick it all apart and it's about the things that it isn't, it seems, this is really mean-spirited of me. And yet
mean-spirited. We're reviewing it. We've got to have a critical eye.
I do feel in some cases, in some Doctor Who stories, that the sum is greater than the whole of the parts. No, what is that the expression? I always get lost with this. The whole is greater than the sum of the parts. I think in this particular story, the sum is about the sum of the parts. The whole is not, if that makes sense. The whole is not greater. It's a shame. What you've hit on there, Dan, I think is correct. All the components are there and are great. The bits that we love. It just somehow doesn't, for me personally, it doesn't quite hang together well enough to push it into the next bracket where the whole becomes greater than the sum of the parts.
And yet on the terms that Charlotte correctly identified earlier on, you're talking, Charlotte, about each of the 4 parts. If you were to pick them out and watch them in isolation, they've almost got their own vibe.
Yes.
Yeah.
Then you think, well, in that case, it's kind of job done. It delivered on target.
I think maybe sort of unhappy accident, if that's the right term here, in the fact that they had a character which they wrote with enough interest, which when you first see them, you're sort of transfixed with the monk, and you're sort of really intrigued with the monk, and then you get a little taster of, like you said, those him and the Doctor sort of crossing wits a bit, but you only get a little bit, and then you've got this actor Butterworth who just utterly is one of these actors that you give him enough material and he runs with it. He can really sort of fill in the blanks and really come on screen and just get your attention and captivate you.
He's just as good as Hartnell is in this, in fact.
Yes.
And what I mean by unhappy accident a little bit is it's so good that you sort of want more. You need a little bit more because
that's
it's
it, Charlotte.
For what it is so well. And that's why I honestly think the monk as a character has endured in Who, even though you think about this is a character that only technically, if I'm wrong, you guys will correct me, this is his only classic story, isn't it?
No,
he does reappear.
He reappears in the Daleks' master plan. But only for a couple of episodes. But what's interesting, Charlotte, is that it's down to the success of the character, and I think that is because of Peter Butterworth, that he is the first recurring character to ever appear in Doctor Who.
I didn't quite know if he'd had other ones, but I just think this character, I'll correct myself then, in the long run of Classic Who, it isn't a lot of episodes. It isn't a lot of time on screen, and that's the better way to phrase it, because I didn't quite know what other stories he'd been in.
Not a lot, no.
Not a
6
lot,
episodes.
But he's the character that, even when I was watching New Who, I knew about the monk. Fans were saying, can we have the monk back? Can we have, every time we had a master reveal again, so many of the fans were like, oh, but it could have been the monk.
Yes.
That's what I mean. This character did such a good job, and the actor and the writing, that it's that thing of, I just want a little bit more. I think that's what it is.
I think truth be told now, it would be criminal to bring the monk back, because I don't believe there is anybody on earth at the moment that would play that role as well as Peter Butterworth. Yes. Nobody. I defy anybody to find an actor that could portray the role as well as Peter Butterworth. So I pray.
Well, they would do what they always do with characters like with the Master and the Doctor, wouldn't they? And they'd give it to a character actor and expect them to infuse that incarnation with their personality. I mean, back to the plot of this. I personally, as much as I love this, it probably doesn't get out of second gear.
I think that's perfect
until far too late, and so that's what keeps it from, as you say, Simon, sort of ascending to being a true Doctor Who great. But what it does bring to the broader mythology, and what it gives us sort of on a week-to-week basis. If you watch this one episode a night stripped across the week, like I did last week, there's something to look forward to at the end of a working day. You know, to send you off to bed with a smile on your face. And I think that's enough, particularly after 60 years old this year, this piece of television. Believe it or not.
Yes.
I mean, as regards the monk, I was wondering watching it this time, because I was picking up on elements of the dialogue, and it seems that the monk's TARDIS, which is beautifully revealed. I mean, that has to be one of the best cliffhangers, certainly of the 1960s, when Stephen and Vicki realise, and we're in another TARDIS. The monk's got a TARDIS, and we see those little differences we were talking about earlier on. But the Doctor mentions that this TARDIS is from several decades later on. This is a more advanced model. And so even though the monk is one of the Doctor's own people, it seems that they don't know one another in the way that the Doctor and the Master know one another, the Doctor and the Rani know one another. They recognise that they are of the same civilization, but it seems that the monk is actually from a point further in the history of the planet we would come to know as Gallifrey. I can't remember if that's defined or redefined in the Dalek Master Plan. But I think that's a really interesting idea as well, that there's something of his own future and technology that the Doctor doesn't know yet. And when the Doctor starts fiddling with the monk's TARDIS, I thought, well, does he know what he's doing? As he's sort of pulling out all the bits and Vicky's watching him, as he's trying to set the trap for the monk. Does he know what he's doing? Because has he seen? Does he know what that part does? Because this is several decades on. This is several models on. But they never play with that, do they?
No, but he does it. The truth is, the Doctor doesn't care. Does he's having too much fun? No. That's what I find.
He never cares, does he?
No, and that's where you're right, Dan. It kicks into. It just about manages to kick into third gear by halfway through episode 4, which is just a little bit too late. But what they do then is lovely. I love the way the last half of that episode plays out. The Doctor is having so much fun laying this trap for the monk. You just can't help but get caught up in his. And I love the way Vicki is saying to him, what are you doing? And he gets very stern. And then Stephen says, yeah, but what are you really doing? And he gets stern with Stephen then. And it's just that bantering, that backwards and forwards.
So given the fact that so much of this was compromised in losing the lead actor for 1 week, not least of all, and people so much sort of coming and going, because I think Verity Lambert had just handed in her notice prior to this being filmed as well. So that's bound to have affected the castings in some way or another. I know that William Hartnell was really upset by that, wasn't he? So all of this was going on, and yet this hangs together really, really well. Do you think it is down to simply the fact that Dennis Spooner's scripts are really good, particularly for what was expected on a week-to-week basis, as Charlotte said, and Douglas Camfield is all over this and it's all nailed down?
I think the way to look at it is it's a very good, solid story. It's difficult to hate the Time Meddler, I think, but it's also difficult to fall in absolute love and call it the greatest story of the William Hartnell era. It's kind of somewhere in that middle safe ground. It does everything very solidly, very confidently, very stably. As I said, there's nothing that you can pull out and say, oh, but that's just so terrible. How they ruined it with that. But likewise, there's nothing really that stands out as in, wow, that's what lifts it up into the upper echelons. So I think it's just a very solid, stable, good, square William Hartnell story. For me, in many ways, it plays very much like a play on stage. The more I watch this, the more I think, this could absolutely have been a stage play. You'd have had the monastery on one side, you'd have had the village on the other side, you'd have had this forest the forest set up in the middle, and you literally could have played it in three sets across the stage as the characters just move backwards and forwards. It plays like a stage play to me, and that isn't a criticism, because it does hold the attention as sort of as bogged down as it gets in its own sort of story, and as low on incident as it is, and it is sadly low on incident. It still holds the attention. You don't really get bored in this, I don't think. Do you? Did anybody get bored in this?
No, I never get bored of this.
Not once.
I think it's a combination of everything. I mean, the script, obviously, but Hartnell is so confident by this point. He's got that character nailed down. And he's the constant between the change. But the other two, I mean, Vicky's settled in by this point, and for me, I mean, like Dan was saying at the start, Vicky's my favourite companion. Vicki gets to things that I feel like Susan ought to have done. Didn't get to to do it. So, Vicky's a lot more headstrong, a lot more confident. And Stephen just fits in perfectly as kind of like a Ian substitute. They just all work really well. And for me, this is kind of like the last time in the Hartnell era where everything kind of fits. I mean, it wasn't Jackie Lane's fault, but I never felt like Dodo and Stephen worked as well.
No.
As, Vicky and Stephen, and, this trio is kind of like the last great trio for me for Hartnell.
It is surprising how easy Peter Purves slips into not just the character, but into feeling like he belongs in this show, that he's part of the fabric of Doctor Who in just 2 or 3 weeks. Maybe the intensity of recording an episode that William Hartnell wasn't in. Maybe that was a kind of baptism of fire. I don't know. Put all the responsibility onto the 2 actors, but it works really, and he makes it look so easy as well. And we forget how young he was when this was recorded.
Well, he's sort of in bits of this story. He's the leading man, isn't he?
Yes.
With the way he's sort of shot and some of his lines and some of the sort of the story beats he gets.
And I never feel, Charlotte, like he's got all of William Russell's lines. I never feel that this is just a substitute character for Ian Chesterton.
Yeah, and that's what I was about to say. And it's interesting that on the surface, you could go, well, they've just got another young man, haven't they, to sort of be the action guy. But no, I think Peter brings a real lovely subtlety to his acting in this. Like when he appears in the TARDIS looking like he's about to fall over, and he's obviously just recovering from being from sort of all the things that happened before. Like that could have been overplayed, but I think he just did the right amount of sort of being disoriented and not knowing what was going on. In even like there's a moment I love, and it's very small, where he sort of looks at the teddy he's holding, and for me that's really subtle acting, because you can see he's almost like being like, okay, I don't know what's going on, but I can understand this, and it just sort of shows a bit of vulnerability.
There's a little scene when the villagers have captured them, but now they're going to let them go, and they're giving them, the provisions, and he stops and says thank you, and they say, God bless you.
God go with you, or something, isn't it? Yeah.
And it's that moment of real, oh my God, this is real.
Yeah.
And
I'm probably actually being quite rude because they've just given me food, and so actually I better had to say thank you properly.
He just stops and turns around, and I think that's like the first time he's fully accepted what's going off around him.
Yeah. The thing that I find is particularly interesting, what we've got to remember with Peter Purves is he was cast very, very late in the day. He played the part of Morton Dill towards the beginning of The Chase. Now, at that point, he was not Stephen Taylor at all, and they were still a couple of weeks from filming the final episode of The Chase when they needed an actor to be playing Stephen Taylor, and the part still wasn't cast. And it was only then because they'd seen Peter Purves recently in the recording for the part of Morton Dill that they thought, oh, this is our Stephen Taylor. So he came into the role remarkably late. It was only about 3 or 4 episodes after the episode that he'd been Morton Dill in The Chase that he's then suddenly now the companion in the last episode of The Chase and about to go into Time Meddler. So he was cast literally that close to the wire. So he had very little prep time to get his head around this character.
I was going to say, that's so impressive, because from his early scenes, you can feel as an actor he's already got an idea about Stephen.
Yes.
And what he's going to be like, what's his character traits, what's his sort of flaws, but also his sort of brilliance. And you can see that already is starting to form in this actor's head. And like you said, he's so young. It just makes you think, and I think we've said this a lot about the William Hartnell years, especially, how lucky we were with companions with who they cast.
Yeah.
Like, I think as much as Hartnell was the beating centre, and he needed to be, but the fact that they had an actor there that they knew, if he can't do an episode because of health issues or just issues to do with needing holidays, that they could go, but we've got the companion actors, we've got other actors which we know can just really brilliantly come and take that place. And then when Hartnell comes back, it's back to being his sort of show.
And to be honest, Charlotte, you do barely notice in episode 2 that Hartnell is missing. I think because Maureen O'Brien and Stephen Taylor do such a great job.
Yes.
You barely notice. It's only towards the end you suddenly clock, oh, hold on, we're not going to see the Doctor. It's very cleverly done, and they carry it. The two of them absolutely,
and that makes
the leads.
And that makes episode 2 of this story the first episode to not feature any of the original cast of Doctor Who, the original 4 cast members of Doctor Who. I love the fact that the character of Stephen as well, he seems to revel in the idea of joining the crew of a time machine. Once he accepts it, kind of embraces it. He's not in a rush to get back anywhere, which again is a difference. It's enough of a difference to just spice things up that little bit. But I think my favourite line is again from Vicki, where he says, I'm joining a crew of a time machine, and she says, no, he's the crew, we're just the passengers. And she points at the Doctor. And then the Doctor says anything. It's a beautiful moment. Fantastic scene that just sort of tops off this story really, really nicely. Time for a break now. A short break to gather our thoughts and collect our scores, which, as luck would have it, is exactly how long it takes Kev to fill you in about all the other great shows and engrossing conversations going on across the fabulous Fandom Podcast Network. Listen up, stay right where you are. We'll be back in a moment.
Thank you for listening. We hope you're enjoying this podcast. Here are the other great shows on the Fandom Podcast Network. Culture Clash, where we discuss the latest in entertainment and pop culture. Blood of Kings, our show covering the entire Highlander universe. Couch Potato Theater, we celebrate our favorite movies. And Time Warp, our fandom flashback show discussing a year in movies and our favorite retro movie, TV, and pop culture topics. Good Evening, discussing all things Alfred Hitchcock. Hair Metal Podcast, we cover the rock metal music of the 80s and early 90s. Type 40, a Doctor Who podcast, discussing the time-traveling Doctor Who universe. Lethal Mullet, an action film podcast covering the 80s, 90s, and beyond. Also, check out the Lethal Mullet Network for more great podcasts. What a Piece of Junk, our Star Wars podcast. Making Treks, a Star Trek podcast with a deep dive into the final frontier. The Fandom Show, our Fandom Podcast Network live YouTube show discussing the hottest topics in fandom. The True Believers MCU podcast discussing the Marvel Cinematic and Television Universe. Union Federation, our Star Trek and the Orville show. And we're proud to welcome the BQN Network to the Fandom Podcast Network. Please visit our friends on the BQN Network, a Star Trek Universe podcast that also includes your favorite topics, movies, history, superheroes, and more. You can find the Fandom Podcast Network on YouTube. The Fandom Podcast Network is also on all major podcast platforms. The Fandom Podcast Network audio master feed is on Podbean at fpnet.podbean.com. You can find the Fandom Podcast Network on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. You can email us at fandompodcastnetwork@gmail.com. Thank you so much for listening, and remember, respect others and enjoy your fandom.
And you can treat yourself or treat your other selves to a little something from a selection of merchandise over at the Fandom Podcast Network's TeePublic store. There's a link to all of that in the show notes. It all goes right back into supporting the network in its continuing mission to keep you topped up with the very best in geeky pop culture coverage, so everybody wins. Right, so Charlotte, Simon and Sarah, they haven't escaped, and I'm not about to release them anytime soon either, or at least not before we've delivered our scores on this classic 1965 Doctor Who story, The Time Meddler, by outgoing script editor Dennis Spooner. So the further back we go into Doctor Who history, does it make it a greater heresy to start awarding scores to these classic stories, these indispensable slices of Who?
Not the slightest. They're still just as legitimate. They're still up for grabs for how much do we like them and how much do we not.
To celebrate or to diss Shooty Gatter episodes is one thing, but these are important pieces of our cultural history.
They're the bedrock of the series. They are the bedrock of the series. There's no two ways about it. And it's interesting because I think you can actually see quite a lot in the Time Meddler that then feeds in to future Doctor Who. That the whole talk about that they're one of the same people. They're from the same planet. The whole stuff about changing history and as we've said, sort of shades of grey of villainy. It does it all. I think it was quite a forward thinking story. This, I think, it feeds a lot into future Doctor Who,
setting up the mythology.
Yes.
The Time Lords and story beats. If it wasn't for Dennis Spooner and this, would we have got Pyramids of Mars and that lovely scene when Sarah opens the TARDIS and sees that alternate future? I think that's what it needed. Actually, it needed a scene where Vicki and Stephen go back and they see what would happen if the Vikings had been defeated. Good things might happen, but then on the other side of things, bad things would have happened. That might have made it a bit less.
Or maybe have one of them have the memory change. What they were talking about, and have the other one keep the original memory.
It's the light. It's the light that it shines on the Doctor himself. I think that's worth the most. Which it doesn't shine for very long, but it's just long enough to make us look at the character in a slightly different way, to add another wrinkle for Hartnell to play with.
Yeah. Well, I mean,
and to add a little bit more magic.
It's another instance where, because before, like in series 1, apart from the Daleks, the Doctor just turns up, explodes, rolls with it. He don't really get involved, does he? And then a lot of it is just
the nature of adventure television.
Let's get back to the TARDIS as quick as possible, and something happens.
Yeah, to move things along.
Whereas this, as soon as he's figured out, the monks' planet, and it's like, no, we've got to intervene here. I'm not standing for that. So it's just interesting to see, what the Doctor will, intervene for. It's fascinating.
And I do think it is also interesting to see that as we've already said, William Hartnell just absolutely is firing on 6 cylinders. I don't know about 4 cylinders. He is absolutely going for it. Yeah. He's so confident in the role at this point. He and don't take this the wrong way, he almost overdoes it. He's enjoying himself so much that he almost over eggs the pudding, and he doesn't, because he's such a consummate actor. He just stays the right line of where he can get away with almost eating the scenery with some of those scenes with the monk. But it's not actually that, because it's just that I think the quality of Peter Butterworth's acting has pushed him up a notch, and he's making sure that that William Hartnell rises to the occasion and levels with Peter Butterworth. So as I say, he comes very close to over egging the pudding, but he doesn't. And the fun that he has with some of those lines, he's a joy to watch. William Hartnell, for me, is a joy to watch in this story, because he's having so much fun. He's enjoying himself, whether he's working out the plot machinations of when the Vikings are going to land and when William the Conqueror is going to, what's going to happen, and then working out the Machiavellian plot of the monk. So he's just having a ball with this, William Hartnell, as is the Doctor. And so it just suddenly becomes a joy to watch the role of the Doctor. And it's such a change from something like An Unearthly Child or even the Daleks, from that very dark, foreboding depiction of the Doctor, to suddenly come across this very, very light-hearted, fun-loving, comical role with not particularly comical lines. It's just that William Hartnell brings the comedy and the fun out of those lines.
And the general public couldn't get enough of any of it, Simon. The ratings for this story are very consistent, considering, as you say, it's at the end of the second season. They're going into the summer too. And yet here we are with part one comes in at 8.9 million, just drops a little for the second episode at 8.8. 7.7 million people were there to watch episode 3, and 8.3 million is that which the story and the season closes out with there for part 4 of the Time Meddler. Checkmate. They're impressive ratings, aren't they? The consistency of them.
There's nothing wrong at all.
And especially as, you know, those figures were actually people sat in their lounge watching it on the TV.
All the way through, Charlotte.
But the fact that, like, back then, if you watched it, you were properly sat engrossed watching it. You weren't, I watched it on iPlayer for 5 minutes. Like, that sort of thing. Like they do now.
And there's a reason why episode 3 dips to 7.7. I can't remember what the reason is. It's something like the Wimbledon final or something like that. There was something happening that caused a bit of a dip in episode 3. It wasn't just an unprecedented dip. These are really good, consistent ratings. It's still the series is still loved at this point. There's no doubt about it.
I think it's the kind of story where if people watch this and then they went off on their summer holidays and they think, how many more weeks until Doctor Who's back on? If this was the last thing that they remember, there's enough hanging in the air, isn't there? Enough confidence in that new cast so that the younger viewers aren't going to be too sad about the fact that perhaps their favourite cast member may have left just a few weeks earlier.
I think the series exudes such confidence at this point in what it's doing. It knows what it's doing. It's very well bedded in. That I honestly think even the departure of Susan and Ian and Barbara would have been forgotten quite quickly, because it's still very much business as usual, isn't it? It just takes it in its stride and it just keeps motoring on, and it tells a very confident story. And so it's not sort of apologizing. It's not trying to make up for lost ground or the fact that it's lost its 3/4 of its original cast. It takes it in its stride and it carries on.
At the end, with the faces on the screen, was there a particular reason for that?
Because it was brought in directorially by Douglas Camfield, simply because he knew it was going to be the end of the season, and so he just wanted to do something simple that wasn't in the script, that just signified we're closing out for a little bit of a break at this point. It just sort of gave it a little bit of a full stop romantically at the end of the episode. That's why it was there.
It is really lovely. Of course, yes, it would be business as usual, and it's business as usual for us. I think we've held off the inevitable for long enough. It's time for us to score this story out of 5, as is customary. And yes, you are allowed half marks, everybody. So the question is, what would you give the Time Meddler out of 5? I mean, is this a difficult one to score? I don't know, given the fact of what we've just said.
It isn't difficult for me to score. I am going to give it 2.5 out of 5, because it's really what we've touched on throughout this, which is that the component parts are beautiful. I love Peter Butterworth. I love William Hartnell. I love Maureen O'Brien and Peter Purvis in their individual roles. I love the way they play them. I love some of the lines. Some of the dialogue is great, particularly for the Doctor and the monk. I love some of the directorial flourishes that Douglas Camfield brings to it. But as I say, for me, the whole is lesser than the sum of those parts. It still feels very stagey, it feels a little bit, as you said, Dan, the pace is not great. It would have, for me, benefited from some much, much tighter editing, and as I say, even a part taking out and cutting down to 3 parts. So squarely 2.5 for me. There are bits of it that I love, but it just can't push into the top echelon for me at all.
2.5 out of 5 from
that,
Simon.
That seems far too low for me. Okay, I'm going to give it 4.
Wow.
Because I really love this story. I would like to give it 5, like you were saying. All the components are there. You're right, Simon, for it to be a 5. But yeah, it's that second part, and it feels like there's that gap in the episode 2, and then everything just revs up in episode 4, and yeah, it just needs tighter put together. But yeah, everything that the script, the dialogue, some brilliant lines, the comedy. Yeah, it's an easy watch. Some 60s ones, as much as I love them, they can be a slog.
Yeah.
But this to me, it just feels an effortless watch. I always have a smile on my face. When Dan suggested this story, I just lit up because I know I'm going to have a great time with this. And I love Vicki, I love Stephen, I love the First Doctor. So if it wasn't for that pacing, I think I would have given it a 5 because I'm very generous like that. But yeah, solid 4 for me, absolutely.
I'm feeling quite mean now. Over to you, Charlotte.
I think this is once again showing really strong character work, and this is something that I love to watch in Classic Who, because like I said before, I feel like there's just more time to breathe, and I feel like when they do have the chance to really drill down with characters, they take it, and I love that. And I think I forgot how strong actually Stephen was as an introduction. Like, this is one that I'd seen before, but I forgot how good Peter Purvis was. Like, that was because, like I said, he just hits the ground running. And I'm somebody who I quite love Ian as a companion. He's one of the sort of the classic male ones that I quite like. But I think Peter's just got that slightly different energy, which is such good fun. Like, he's a bit more forthright. He's a bit more sort of like Ian could be sort of in the Doctor's face, but he was quite gentlemanly about it at times, even when he could get angry at him.
Yeah.
Whereas I feel like Peter's in the best way, just a bit more rough around the edges with his
bit more edgy.
acting.
Yeah.
And I quite enjoy that. And I think that's a fun dynamic against Hartnell, especially with Vicki as well in the mix, who can also speak her mind. So I think you've got 4 characters here who are very forthright and very they're very sure in their own opinions. And it makes a really fun dynamic then later on when they get more stories together. I think the Monk's one of the best sort of the new edition characters to have this early on. Like when Dan said, Time Meddler, I was like, oh, that's the meddling monk, isn't it? Like, he's such a standout in this story. And I think that is because they knew how to have restraint. And that's what's impressive here. They could have really made him over-the-top comedy, over-the-top sort of, I'm zany, I'm different, like, look at me. Like,
they would do now. They would do now.
They could have done that, but we said, they always kept it just that level of, no, actually, he's got a point, he's intelligent, but he can be quite sort of compassionate, and if you met him and you didn't know, you probably would quite take to him. But then he's got that little streak, that sort of, I'm going to get my money and get what I want as well. So, and that greyness, I think that's such a fun thing to have as in the Monk, as this grey character. But I think you watching it again, you forget about the plot issues until you watch it. This is one of those stories that it's not immediate, and then you sort of get into it and you think, oh God, it's a bit Scooby-Doo, isn't it? They're running around a lot, they're chasing the villain, they're getting trapped in stuff, and then they're not. So yeah, I'm going to go with 4 like Sarah, because I think you have to knock off a point for the plot, sort of that sort of baggage we talked about and the pacing, but everything else I really quite enjoy in this story.
I'm feeling even meaner now. Dan.
You don't know what Dan's going to give it.
Over to you, Dan.
Sorry, Simon. Look, this takes me right back. Not to 1965.
I wasn't going to say that.
Back to 1992. So this started off a whole season of Doctor Who repeats right at the start of 1992. We'd been waiting for any terrestrial repeats, I don't know if you remember, Simon, and they springboarded out of a documentary, a short half an hour kind of
Correct.
package thing, directly into this, 1 episode per week, and then they went on through the Doctors, and that was parallel to the growing line of VHS releases. So Doctor Who, classic Doctor Who, was coming back. It was all opening up for us, for me.
Yeah.
I think this is a great story to recommend to not just new series fans, actually, but to anybody who came to the show in the colour era and has maybe got a bit of a kind of an impasse when it comes to black and white, a barrier of some sort. Because I think for the most part, although this may be a mixed bag in every way that we've said, I don't think it's creaky in the way that some black and white stuff is, that some classic Doctor Who is. I think when it does pick up, when it's there, when it's on the balls of its feet, it's actually quite modernised. I think you said, Simon. The big plus for me with this story, though, I think, is simply how it makes me feel. I feel like it's like a warm cup of soup. It's a cup of soup Doctor Who story. It's not a full meal. It's not a full meal, so it doesn't satisfy me fully, but it slips down really, really well and hits the spot more often than not. So I'd say that to anybody who's a little frustrated by it, just kind of be patient with it and revel in whether it's the techniques that Simon was talking about or the characterisation that I think we've all spoken about, particularly you though, Charlotte. Sort of enjoy all that and feast on the fourth part, which I think is pretty much a total joy. Anything with Hartnell and Butterworth together, it's just a crying shame we didn't get more of it earlier in the story, or later for that matter. I could have stood more of the monk, but then again, you have to sort of step back and think, well, Hartnell actually wasn't in the series himself for that much longer either. Mm-hmm. So that time would have passed too. Yeah, I am trying to duck giving it a score out of 5, but I've settled on 4 as well.
I feel really mean.
And because of the fact, and realistically, it's probably a 3.5. But I always enjoy it so much. I always see something different in it. It's brought me so much pleasure. I think it's a crucial part of Doctor Who history, and I always have done. But now the things that I sort of recognise it for, and that which is in its gift, isn't the stuff that used to attract me to it, which, it's the first appearance of another Time Lord. Now all that sort of stuff, it's not inconsequential, don't get me wrong, but it's kind of secondary to the evolution of the show. I think this is a key evolutionary slice of Doctor Who that tops off that second season beautifully. I've always loved season 2. I practically love the entirety of it as it is. And this story, I think I could recommend this to practically anybody. Even if people are black and white phobes, haven't really got too much to suffer through. And if they want to skip episode 2, they probably can. So it's a 4 out of 5 from me. That's 3 4 out of 5s there for myself, Charlotte and Sarah.
I'm feeling really mean. I feel I should up it to
Simon,
3.
There'll be another classic story that we'll all not like or have issues with, and you will love. Don't worry.
There you go. No, I do feel true to my 2.5. That's just about, comparing it to other black and whites in particular that I love a lot more than this. 2.5 is it's about true for me. So yeah, I'm sticking with it for better or worse.
The Time Meddler is still available to stream on the BBC iPlayer and available on disc too. It's got a storied history in media. First of all, the hardback book came out in October 1987 with a paperback that followed in March 1988. There was a paperback re-release to tie into that repeat in 92 as well, and an audiobook finally in October 2016. And that was read by Peter Purvis himself. All of those topped off with this fabulous Jeff Cummins cover artwork, which is one of my favourites. I told Jeff that when we had him on the show, Simon. He couldn't believe it, could he?
And it's a particularly good piece of artwork. And I love the fact that it's got that he put the wristwatch on the monk.
Yes.
And of course, the monk spends most of the story looking at his watch, as his wrist, wondering where his watch has gone to. And so, I love the fact that it's here on the artwork. It's great.
Just prior to the story.
Yes.
It was there when I went to the art exhibition in
Yes, correct.
There's a lovely, is that the original
Yeah, that's the original, and
well.
it's really small, isn't it, Sarah? It's not much bigger. The original artwork is not actually much bigger than the Target novel cover itself.
Yeah.
It's just a shame that the copyright laws back then. Well, it wasn't so much the copyright laws so much as the sort of the residual payments that Target didn't want to make, so they couldn't use Peter Butterworth's likeness on the cover, and that's why Jeff Cummins had to just use a bloke. I can't remember who he uses. I think he uses his brother or something like. Was it his brother? It is something like that is the model. For this, and it's a shame because it was in those days they were avoiding paying more than they had to for likenesses on covers.
One downside of the fact it got that repeat in 1992 was the fact that it took 10 years for it to make it to the VHS range, so it didn't join the rest of the series on VHS on cassette until November 2002. A DVD followed in February 2008, and finally, most recently in December 2022, it's part of the Season 2 Blu-ray DVD box set, Doctor Who, the collection, obviously still available. I think the DVD is still available as well, so there's lots of places you can get that. Over on the Whoniverse app as well, on the iPlayer, the Time Meddler is there, along with virtually all of classic Doctor Who, although I think that's sort of diminishing by the week, really, on the iPlayer. Mm-hmm. It's available to watch for free in full in some territories on the brand new Doctor Who Classic YouTube channel. You can get that right now. And there's the Tales of the TARDIS representation, also up on the BBC iPlayer. That dropped in November 2023 and featured those all-new scenes with Peter Purvis and Maureen O'Brien back in character as Stephen and Vicki there. Absolutely delightful, heartwarming stuff. In fact, do you remember those?
Yeah, I do. Yeah, I have to admit, this was one of my favourite ones, seeing these two, reunited again. There's such a warmth there. I mean, there are with everybody that was on Tales of the TARDIS, but there's just something about these two. But again, I'm just biased because it's Vicki and Stephen, and I just adore them as much as Ian and Barbara. I really do.
But also, this was the first time that they'd been reunited. We're used to seeing some of the other pairings. We're used to seeing Nyssa and Tegan still popping up together every so often, whereas this was something of a unique repairing. So I think that's what made this one particularly special.
I'd almost forgotten about these scenes, Charlotte.
Yeah, but the problem was they were lovely for what we had, but it sort of felt afterwards, oh, you could have done a bit more with this idea. And like when I think it was Russell that came out and said afterwards, it was very last minute.
Yeah.
They even thought to do this, and it was just, that's such a shame.
Yeah. Give it a little bit more time and a little bit more thought and effort, and they could have been truly, truly great. Nonetheless, it's still just lovely to see them back together again. And as you say, Sarah, just two good companions that they're very, very likable.
Maybe they'll be reunited again in further Tales of the TARDIS installments. We promised there's more of those on the way, maybe later this year, but who knows who they'll star. Okay, so that's a long overdue review from the era when William Hartnell was the boss. Here at Type 40.
He's still the boss.
He's still the boss.
Yeah, let us know what you think. Obviously, it is quite odd that a Doctor Who podcast should exist for nearly 7 years before setting about a programme of reviews in the way that we have recently. But then again, Type 40 has never been your typical Doctor Who podcast.
Yeah, we're just getting to reviews the long way around. I think it's very
I was going to say, if the Doctor can't drive the TARDIS at this point, I think we can be allowed not to review a Hartnell episode.
Yeah, we're taking the interesting route, but it doesn't mean we love the Hartnell era any less, because that's not true. No. I love this era so much.
Yeah, and that is the old girl starting up and calling time to stop our boasting there. There's more coming your way soon enough. Look out for that wherever you found this. It could have been at the dedicated home feed for Type 40. That's at type40.podbean.com. Maybe we rolled up on the podcatcher of your choice. Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Google Play, all those places. We're in front of your eyes too on YouTube, the world's largest streaming platform, on the Type 40 channel with extended video editions of every show. There's exclusive extra Type 40s, as well as our live stream magazine show, Type 40 Live, completely raw, completely live, where anything can happen, anything can be said, and often is. Get all of that over at Type 40 on YouTube. We're still on the fabulous Fandom Podcast Network's master feed, loaded up with all those treats for your ears. Never mind on the weekly, it's coming at you on the daily. Please consider a trip sideways in time for more quality shows from the FPN. Maybe you'd like to have your say on all of this and that. The good news is you can do if you reach out to us through our social media, Instagram and X at Type40 Doctor Who, or email us type40doctorwho at outlook.com. There's the Type 40 Facebook group to join the discussion, those never-ending debates on the virtues or not of the new series and the classic series, as well as all new Doctor Who. Speak freely, but no time meddling. We are watching everybody over there in the Type 40 Facebook group. Simon, Charlotte, Sarah, what a fabulous episode. What a great review. It's just nice to get everybody together and have a chat about a real seminal piece of classic Doctor Who. I really do feel that way about the Time Meddler.
It's warm and fuzzy, isn't it, the Time Meddler? That's what it is. It's warm and fuzzy.
Yeah, and sometimes it's just nice just to talk about an episode.
Yeah.
Just without all the other stuff that's floating around right now. It's just nice to sit down and talk about Doctor Who. It's what we love. And
remember why we love it in the first place.
Yeah, remember why we love it. And just hang out with friends. And it's lovely.
That's
I feel
what it's all about.
warm and cozy now.
Floating around. Speaking of floating around, who's floating around on social media nowadays? You don't really do social media, do you, Sarah? But
pop up on Facebook now and again, but I don't really use it.
I was going to say, I don't really do it much either. You'll catch me basically more on YouTube, either that's in chats in Type 40 or just about when it comes to Doctor Who. That's usually where you'll find me.
Simon, you've still got your regular haunt, haven't you? How many years now has the Hunatics been in existence?
Since 1987, so go do the maths, as they say in America.
Coming up to the 40th anniversary of the Hunatics then.
Yeah, not a million miles away. Woohoo! That's got to be a reunion, surely. Woohoo! Stay tuned for that. Got to do it.
And you can find me on Instagram and X as the Spacebook. I'm wheezing, groaning, ranting and raving about all things geeky inside and outside of the TARDIS in TV, movies, comic books, and everywhere else that you can celebrate geek culture. Another blessing I find about watching a story like The Time Meddler is it always makes me hungry to watch more Doctor Who. New Doctor Who, classic Doctor Who. Where are we going to go next? Only one way to find out. That's to stay tuned to Type 40, where we always have the time. If you have the space, we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.